From a very young age, he always believed that the world was a fair place. His parents had taught him that if you worked hard, stayed honest, and treated people kindly, then life would reward you with the same energy. It was a simple belief, but to him it was everything. When he graduated and got his first real job, he was filled with excitement. It wasn't the best company in the world, but for him it was a dream come true. The smell of fresh coffee in the office, the sound of people typing, the buzz of conversations, it all made him feel alive. He thought, this is where I'll grow, where I'll prove myself. He arrived early on his first day, neatly dressed and ready to learn. He greeted everyone with a smile. Some smiled back, others barely noticed him. Still, he didn't mind. He believed people just needed time to know him. His manager seemed nice at first, polite, confident, and encouraging. His teammates looked experienced and helpful. But within the first few weeks, he started to notice small things, tiny moments that didn't feel right but were easy to ignore. He noticed how people pretended to be busy when the boss walked by, and how they whispered about others when they weren't around. He noticed how some workers took credit for things they didn't do, while others kept quiet out of fear. But he kept telling himself, maybe that's just how offices work. Maybe I'll get used to it. He worked hard. Every project, every task, he gave it his best. He stayed late to finish reports, helped teammates without expecting anything in return, and believed that his effort would speak for itself. And for a while, it did. His work was good, and people started to notice. Even his manager complimented him once in a meeting, saying, "Good job.
Keep it up." That one line gave him so much happiness that he couldn't stop smiling for the rest of the day. But life,
as he was about to learn, doesn't always reward the good heart first. A few months later, a new project came in, something important that could open doors to promotions and recognition. He had spent nights researching ideas, creating designs, and building something fresh. He was proud of it. When he shared it with his manager, he saw genuine interest. "This is really good," the manager said. "Let's polish it a little and present it next week." That night, he went home full of hope. He told his parents that things were finally moving forward. He imagined what it would feel like to be appreciated, to have his work recognized. But a few days later, in a meeting, he sat there stunned. His manager was presenting his idea, but not as their idea. He presented it as his own. The same slides, the same points, even the same phrases. The team clapped. The senior directors nodded in approval. And he sat there silently, his heart sinking deeper with every word. At first, he thought maybe it was just a mistake. Maybe the manager forgot to mention his contribution. But as the meeting ended, and the manager took all the praise, he realized it wasn't a mistake at all. It was planned. After the meeting, he tried to talk about it privately. "Sir," he said softly, "the idea you presented today, it was something I worked on." The manager looked at him with a calm smile, the kind that hides more than it shows. "Of course," he said. "You helped a lot. But in this company, ideas are team property. Don't take it personally. You'll get your chance." That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying the meeting again and again. He had done all that work, stayed up late, skipped meals, and it was gone, just like that. Someone else got the credit. He felt angry, but more than that, he felt betrayed. Not by one person, but by the belief he had in fairness itself. For the first time, he questioned if honesty really mattered. The next morning, he came to the office quietly. The same people who once smiled at him now avoided eye contact. Maybe they knew. Maybe they didn't care. He realized that in this place, people weren't fighting to do good work. They were fighting to survive. And in survival, kindness often came last. Days passed, but the feeling didn't. He tried to move on, to focus on the next task. But inside, something had changed. The spark in his eyes had dimmed a little. He started noticing things he never saw before. How people flattered the boss, how fake smiles filled the air, how honesty was treated as foolishness. He once believed that truth always wins. But now truth looked weak. He saw colleagues getting ahead not because of skill or hard work, but because they knew who to please and when to stay silent. He still tried to hold on to his principles, but it was getting harder. Every time he stayed honest, he lost something. Every time he stayed humble, someone else took advantage. It was as if the world was whispering, "You'll lose if you stay good." One evening, as he was leaving the office, he overheard two co-workers talking near the elevator. One said, "He's too soft. He'll never last here." The other laughed. "Yeah, nice guys don't win." Those words cut deeper than any insult. Nice guys don't win. He repeated it in his head over and over on the way home. Maybe they were right. Maybe the world really did belong to those who played dirty. He sat on the bus, staring out the window as city lights blurred past him. He thought about how strange humans were, so smart yet so cruel. Everyone wanted to succeed, but few cared about doing it the right way. At home, his mother noticed he was quiet. She asked if everything was okay. He just smiled and said, "I'm fine, just tired." But inside, he was questioning everything. He looked at the mirror that night and said to himself, "Maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I expect too much from people." He didn't know it then. But this was the start of his real battle, the one that would test not his skills but his heart. The next day, he went to work again, still polite, still hard-working. But now there was a different look in his eyes, a mix of sadness and determination. He knew the world wouldn't change for him. He would have to learn to survive in it without losing the person he was. And so began his quiet war, not with enemies, but with human nature itself. He learned to observe more, speak less, and think before trusting. He stopped sharing ideas too early, started keeping notes of his work, and slowly built a shell around himself. People still saw him as the polite guy, but inside, he was becoming something stronger, wiser. He didn't become cold, but he became careful. He didn't stop believing in good people, but he stopped expecting everyone to be good. Over time, he realized that kindness wasn't weakness. It just needed boundaries. He could still be good but not blind, still honest but not naive. And even though he had lost one battle, he hadn't lost himself. Deep down, he still believed that the world could be better, just not easily. That's the truth he began to live with, that when you battle with humans, you're not fighting with weapons or power, but with patience, integrity, and heart. And if you want to survive with your soul still intact, you'll need all the luck and strength you can find. Because in the end, the hardest battles are not with others. They're with what people can become when faced with greed, fear, and ambition. And for him, this was just the beginning. He thought that after what happened, things would get better if he just stayed quiet. Maybe time would fix everything. Maybe if he worked harder, people would see the truth. That's what he kept telling himself. So he focused on his job again. He stopped thinking about the stolen idea and tried to move forward. But deep inside, a small voice whispered, "Be careful next time." He wasn't as open as before. He no longer shared every idea during team meetings. Instead, he started working silently, keeping his best thoughts in a small notebook he carried everywhere. He told himself it was just to stay organized, but really, it was his way of protecting himself. Weeks passed and things seemed calm. The office routine felt familiar again. The coffee smell, the typing sound, the fake smiles. He had started to understand how this world worked. If you stayed invisible and didn't challenge anyone, people left you alone. But one day another project came in. It was a big one, and the manager called the whole team together. "We need something fresh," he said. "A creative idea, something that will make us stand out." Everyone nodded, pretending to think. Some looked excited, some uninterested. He sat there quietly, unsure if he should speak. Then his manager looked at him directly and said, "You always have interesting ideas. Why don't you take the lead this time?" For a moment, he froze. He didn't know whether to feel happy or cautious. After a short pause, he nodded and said softly, "All right, I'll do it." That night, he worked for hours. He poured his heart into it, researching, designing, creating something meaningful. He didn't just want to impress anyone. He wanted to prove to himself that good work still mattered. He worked late into the night for a whole week. His eyes burned from the computer screen, his back hurt, but his heart felt alive again. He imagined how proud he would feel presenting it. He wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Finally, the day came. He presented his plan in front of the team, showing slides filled with details, visuals, and logic. He spoke with confidence, something he had almost forgotten he had. When he finished, there was silence for a few seconds. Then, to his surprise, people started clapping. Even his manager smiled and said, "This is very good." That one moment brought back all his hope. He went home that day lighter, happier. For the first time in months, he felt that maybe hard work did get noticed. He even called a friend and said, "I think things are changing." But just like before, life had another lesson waiting. A week later, when the company had to submit the final version of the project to the clients, he checked the presentation file one last time. What he saw made his heart drop. His entire design, the one he had spent nights creating, was changed. His name was gone. His manager's name was at the top. The tone, the structure, everything was still his work, but now it looked like someone else's creation. He stared at the screen for a long time, unable to believe it. It was happening again. He went to his manager's office quietly and asked, "Sir, I just saw the final file. My name isn't there." The manager leaned back in his chair, gave a small smile and said, "We made some team changes. Don't worry about credit. What matters is that we all look good as a company." He wanted to argue, but the calmness in the manager's tone made it clear. This wasn't a conversation. It was an order. When he walked out, he felt something inside him break. Not loudly, but deeply. It wasn't about losing credit anymore. It was about losing trust. For the rest of the day, he couldn't focus. His hands moved, but his mind didn't. People passed by, chatting and laughing, but he felt like a ghost among them. Later that evening, when everyone left, he sat alone at his desk, staring at the office lights. The room was quiet except for the sound of a flickering bulb near the door. He whispered to himself, "So this is how the world works." It wasn't anger he felt. It was disappointment. He had believed that truth would protect him, but in this place, truth had no shield. At home, he tried to distract himself, turned on the TV, scrolled through his phone, but nothing worked. The thoughts kept coming back. Why does honesty always lose? Why do people who cheat always win? He realized something that night. The biggest pain doesn't come when others hurt you. It comes when you realize they don't even see what they did as wrong. The next morning, he went to work with heavy eyes and a silent face. He didn't greet anyone like before. He didn't smile. And no one noticed the change because everyone was too busy playing their own game. A few days later, the project was approved. The manager got praised by the higher-ups. There were congratulations, handshakes, and smiles. Everyone was celebrating except him. He stood near the window watching people laugh. For a moment, he wondered if being selfish was easier. Maybe if he stopped caring, life would hurt less. He looked at his reflection in the glass and said softly, "You can't win this way." But a part of him didn't believe it anymore. That weekend, he visited his old school friend. Over tea, he finally opened up. "You know what hurts the most?" he said. "It's not losing credit. It's realizing people don't care who gets hurt as long as they get ahead." His friend nodded slowly and said, "That's how the world works now. Don't take it personally." That phrase, "don't take it personally," kept echoing in his mind. Everyone said it, but no one understood what it meant to have your work, your effort, your honesty stolen again and again. Over the next few weeks, he started changing, not in anger, but in awareness. He became more observant. He saw how people acted sweet in front of others but turned cold the moment backs were turned. He saw how easily people lied, not out of necessity, but out of habit. He began to understand that in a world driven by competition, kindness was a rare thing. People didn't always mean harm, but they were scared of losing, of being left behind. That fear made them do things they would never admit. And maybe, he thought, that's why humans hurt each other so often. Not because they are evil, but because they are afraid. Still, he couldn't accept it easily. His heart wanted to believe there was a better way, so he made himself a promise that night. "I'll learn how to live in this world, but I won't become like them." He started writing in a small journal every evening. He didn't write about work. He wrote about what he saw, how people behaved, and how he felt. It became his quiet space, a way to make sense of everything. Slowly, that pain began to turn into understanding. He realized he couldn't control how others acted, but he could control how he responded. He stopped expecting people to be kind. Instead, he decided to be kind anyway. Not because it always paid off, but because it defined who he was. The next time someone took his idea, he didn't argue. He simply smiled and noted it down in his journal. Another lesson. Not everyone who smiles at you is your friend. His calmness confused people. They expected anger, but he gave silence. They expected complaints, but he gave effort. And little by little, something changed. He stopped trying to please everyone. He worked quietly and his focus grew stronger. Yes, the wounds were still there, but they had started to heal in a new way, not with revenge, but with maturity. He realized that every human battle isn't fought with fists or words, it's fought inside the heart. Every disappointment shapes you, but it's up to you to decide whether it makes you bitter or wiser. For him, it made him wiser. He understood that not all people were bad, but the world often pushed them to act that way. And once you see that truth, it becomes easier. Not painless, but easier to face. That night, he sat on his balcony feeling the wind brush his face. The city lights looked calmer now. He took a deep breath and whispered, "I'm still here. I'm still me." Because even though he had lost many things, credit, trust, and faith in fairness, he hadn't lost his heart. And that, he realized, was his quiet victory. He started to see the world differently now. The bright side of people that he used to believe in. It wasn't gone, but it was hiding behind masks. And the more he looked, the more he realized everyone was wearing one. At work, he began to notice things that he had ignored before. Smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Compliments that sounded sweet but carried no meaning. Apologies that were said only to look polite, not to show regret. The office wasn't a place of teamwork anymore. It was a stage. Everyone played a role, pretending to be helpful, loyal, or friendly, depending on what they needed at the time. He started calling it the masked world in his mind. A world where truth had to wear makeup just to be accepted. He wasn't angry anymore. He was just learning, observing, understanding. One morning during a team meeting, his manager said, "We are like a family here." The room filled with fake smiles. He looked around and for a moment he almost laughed to himself. Family, he thought. Families care about each other. Here people cared only about who could take the next step up the ladder. Still, he played along. He had learned how to wear his own mask, not out of dishonesty but for survival. He smiled when he needed to. He nodded when others talked. He said yes even when he wanted to say no. But inside he was slowly building a distance, a small wall between himself and the world. Not made of stone but of understanding. He had realized that protecting yourself didn't always mean fighting back. Sometimes it meant keeping your peace quietly. He still worked hard, but not to impress anyone anymore. He worked for himself. His satisfaction came from knowing he gave his best, not from applause or praise. Still, there were days when his heart grew tired. Watching people lie without guilt, cheat without shame, and smile after hurting someone. It was exhausting. Once he watched a coworker gossip about another, spreading small lies just to make them look bad. When that person later walked in, they greeted each other with hugs and laughter as if nothing had happened. He just sat there thinking, how easily humans forget their words when it's convenient. He didn't judge anyone, though. The more he observed, the more he understood that everyone was fighting their own hidden battle. Some were scared of losing their jobs. Some were desperate for attention. Some were just lonely and didn't know how else to connect. He began to see that humans weren't born cruel. They became that way when they thought no one cared about them. One day during lunch, he sat with a few colleagues. They were laughing and joking, but every conversation turned into competition. Who was smarter, richer, more successful? He stayed quiet, eating slowly, listening. Then one of them turned to him and said, "You're too quiet these days. Don't you have anything to say?" He smiled faintly and replied, "Sometimes silence says enough." They laughed and went back to talking. But he meant what he said. Silence had become his way of staying peaceful in a noisy world. At home, he spent more time alone now. He read books, listened to music, and took long walks. He started enjoying small things again, watching the sunset, hearing the rain, feeling the wind. When he saw people arguing on the street or online, he didn't get angry anymore. He just thought, they're wearing their masks too. The world, he realized, was full of people trying to protect themselves by pretending to be someone else. Some pretended to be confident because they were insecure. Some acted tough because they were afraid. And some pretended to be kind only because they wanted to be liked. He didn't blame them. He just didn't want to become one of them. But pretending was contagious. Slowly, without even noticing, he began to lose a small part of himself too. He smiled even when he wasn't happy. He said, "I'm fine," even when he was tired. He laughed at jokes he didn't find funny. He complimented people he didn't trust, and that scared him, because he realized the masks weren't just for others. They were becoming part of him too. One night, after a long day, he looked at himself in the mirror and asked, "Who am I now?" He saw a tired face, polite eyes, and a smile that didn't belong to him anymore. He sat down, opened his old notebook, and began to write. In this world, if you show your real heart, they'll break it. So people wear masks not to lie, but to survive. But what if one day we forget to take the mask off? That thought stayed with him. He didn't want to forget who he truly was. So he started finding ways to keep his heart alive. He began doing small acts of kindness quietly, helping a janitor carry boxes, buying food for a security guard, or listening to a coworker's problems without judgment. He didn't do it for recognition. He did it to remind himself that goodness still existed, even if no one saw it. One day, a junior employee came to him for help. They were new and nervous the same way he had once been. He helped them understand a project and stayed late to guide them. When the junior thanked him, he smiled genuinely for the first time in months. That small moment felt real. No mask, no act. Just a simple human connection. And that's when he realized something important. Not everyone in the world was fake. There were still people who cared, who felt deeply, who tried to do right. They were just harder to find. The next few months went by quietly. He kept his distance from drama, stayed focused on his work, and built a calm routine. He didn't get promoted, but he also didn't care anymore. Peace had become more valuable than position. Still, deep inside, he sometimes felt lonely. Not because he was alone, but because it was hard to find someone genuine in a world full of masks. He longed for honest conversations, for people who said what they meant and meant what they said. But whenever he opened up, people seemed too busy or too careful. So he went back to being silent again. But this silence was different. It wasn't from sadness anymore. It was from understanding. He had learned to see people as they were, not as villains, not as saints, but as humans, flawed, scared, complicated. And even though he didn't trust easily now, he didn't hate anyone either. He just accepted that life was like that. One evening, while leaving work, he saw his manager talking sweetly to another employee. The same manager who had once taken his idea. But instead of bitterness, he felt something else. Pity. He realized that people who depend on lies will always need others to keep them standing. But people who depend on truth, no matter how lonely they are, will always stand stronger. He smiled softly, walked out of the building, and felt lighter. The night air felt different, fresher somehow. He knew the battle wasn't over. The world would still test him, still tempt him to wear the mask again. But now he was aware, and awareness was power. As he walked home, he thought, the trick isn't to fight the world, it's to stay real in a fake one. That became his quiet promise, to stay real. No matter how many masks surrounded him, he would never let one cover his heart completely. And that promise would soon be tested again, harder than ever before. Because in this world of masks, truth doesn't always survive quietly. Sometimes it must stand alone. For a long time, he had learned to live quietly, blending into the background. He had accepted that not everyone was honest, not everyone was kind. He had even learned to protect himself from disappointment. But no matter how much he tried to stay calm, life had a way of testing his peace. It all began one morning when everything in the office felt a little strange. The air was heavier. People were whispering more than usual, and faces looked tense. Something was going on. By afternoon, it was clear. The company was in trouble. A client had accused them of hiding mistakes in reports. There were rumors of fake data and wrong numbers. People began to panic. Nobody wanted to take the blame. The manager called for a meeting. The entire team sat around the long table, eyes full of worry. "There's been a misunderstanding," the manager said, his voice unusually calm. "We'll fix this quietly. No one needs to talk to anyone outside." He felt uneasy. He had worked on some of those reports. He knew the numbers were correct when he sent them. So how could they be fake now? After the meeting, he checked the documents again. To his shock, some of the files had been changed. Numbers were altered and signatures were missing. Someone had edited the reports, and it wasn't him. He realized what had happened. To make results look better, the manager had secretly changed the reports before sending them to the clients. And now, when things were falling apart, The blame was being pushed toward the lower employees. For a few hours he sat at his desk, unable to think. His hands trembled slightly. He didn't want to believe it, but deep inside he knew. This was real. Later that day he was called into the manager's office. The door closed behind him. The manager gave a forced smile and said, "We're in a difficult position." "You worked on these reports, didn't you?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, but I didn't make those changes." The manager leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Listen, I need you to stay quiet about this. If anyone asks, just say the changes were done under your supervision. It'll be easier for everyone. Don't worry, I'll make sure you're protected." For a moment, he just stared at him, trying to process what he'd heard. "You want me to lie?"
he asked softly. The manager's smile faded.
"It's not lying. It's teamwork. Sometimes you have to take one for the team." That sentence hit him hard. He couldn't believe how casually people could twist words to cover the truth. He walked out of the office slowly, his mind spinning. He knew what would happen if he refused. They'd blame him, isolate him, maybe even fire him. He could lose everything he'd worked for. But if he agreed, he'd lose something even more important: his integrity. That night, he didn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about what to do. The easy way was to stay silent, pretend nothing happened. Everyone else was doing that. Why should he be the only one to risk everything? But then he remembered his younger self, the one who believed honesty mattered. He remembered his parents' words, "Do what's right even when it's hard." The next morning, his decision was clear. He would tell the truth, no matter the cost. He went straight to the senior director's office and asked for a few minutes. With calm honesty, he explained what had happened, how the data had been changed, and how he was asked to stay silent. He showed his original copies of the reports with the timestamps and proofs. The director listened quietly. When he finished, there was a long pause. "You understand this could cause serious trouble for your manager?" The director asked. He nodded. "I know. But it's already causing trouble for everyone. I can't lie about it." The director dismissed him with a serious look. He walked back to his desk, heart pounding. People around him whispered, sensing something was up. By the next day, the office was in chaos. An internal investigation had started. The manager avoided looking at him. Some coworkers glared at him, others stayed silent. The friendly smiles were gone. He was no longer part of the team. He was now the one who spoke up, the one everyone quietly blamed for making things worse. The next few weeks were tough. His manager was suspended, and while the investigation continued, the atmosphere around him grew cold. People stopped talking when he entered the room. Some made sarcastic comments. "You think truth pays the bills?" One person said under their breath. He didn't respond. He just kept working quietly. But inside it hurt. He had done the right thing, and yet it felt like he was being punished for it. After a month, the company made a public statement clearing him of wrongdoing, but the damage was done. His image was never the same. People avoided him. They thought he was too honest, the kind of person who couldn't be trusted to keep quiet when things got messy, he realized. Something that day, being good and being accepted, were not. The same thing, a few weeks later, he was called into HR. The woman spoke kindly, but he could hear the message between the lines. "You've done good work here, but maybe this isn't the best environment for you anymore." He nodded slowly. He understood what that meant. When he left the building for the last time, he didn't feel angry. He just felt empty. The city outside was busy as always, cars honking, people rushing, but inside, he felt quiet. He sat at a small tea stall nearby, sipping slowly as he thought about everything that had happened. He had lost his job, his comfort, maybe even his reputation. But as he sat there feeling the cool breeze on his face, a strange peace came over him. He had nothing left to hide, nothing left to fear. He whispered softly, "At least I didn't lose myself." That realization gave him strength. He began to see the world with new eyes. He understood now that truth didn't always bring rewards, but it did bring freedom. And not everyone could afford to be free. Days turned into weeks. He started applying for new jobs, but interviews were difficult. Some companies hesitated when they heard he had exposed his last workplace. They didn't say it directly, but he could feel it. The world didn't always welcome those who told the truth. Still, he didn't regret it. He would rather struggle with honesty than succeed with lies. During those months, he learned more about life than he ever had before. He saw how fear shaped people, how it made them betray, stay silent, or turn cruel. It wasn't always because they were bad, but because they were scared. That realization softened his heart again. He stopped hating anyone for what had happened. Instead, he began to understand them. People weren't monsters. They were just humans, trying to survive in a world that rewarded the wrong things. But survival without values, he thought, is just another form of losing. He started writing again in his journal every day, not about pain, but about strength, about what it means to stay human when the world pushes you to be otherwise. He wrote, "Honesty may not make you popular, but it will make you peaceful, and peace is something no one can steal." One evening as he was walking home, he passed by his old office building. The lights were still on, people still rushing, faces still tired. He watched for a moment, then smiled faintly. He had once been one of them, lost, confused, trying to fit into a system that didn't value truth. But not anymore. He walked away slowly, feeling lighter with every step. That night he sat by his window watching the city lights. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like he was fighting anyone, not even the world. He had fought his battle, and though he had lost his job, he had won something greater himself. He knew life would test him again. There would be more people, more masks, more moments when silence seemed easier, but now he was ready. Because once you've chosen truth over comfort, you stop fearing what others can take away. And even though his journey was far from over, one thing had become clear to him. The real battle was never between people. The real battle was between who you are and who the world tries to make you become. And that, he thought, was a fight worth having. He didn't know how long it took for the truth to stop hurting. Some days he woke up feeling calm. Other days the memories came back like heavy rain, sudden and cold. Losing his job had been painful, but what hurt more was the realization that honesty had cost him everything. Still, deep down, he knew he had done the right thing. Even when people called him foolish or naive, he reminded himself that peace mattered more than approval. At first, the days felt long and empty. He stayed home, scrolling through job listings, sending resumes, and waiting for calls that never came. Each rejection made him question himself a little more. One evening, while sitting alone at his small desk, he opened his old notebook, the one he had filled with his thoughts during those difficult days at work. He began reading page after page, and it felt like looking into an old mirror. There were words filled with pain, disappointment, but also hope. He closed the notebook slowly and whispered, "Maybe it's time to start again." But starting again wasn't easy. The fear of being betrayed again followed him everywhere. Every time he went for an interview, he smiled politely, but inside he wondered, will this place be any different? Or will it be the same story all over again? One company called him for a second interview, and for a moment he thought this could be the one. But later, the HR person said softly, "We appreciate your honesty, but we need someone who can handle pressure without making internal issues public." That sentence stayed with him. It wasn't a rejection of his skills, it was a rejection of his truth. For weeks, he lived on savings. He stopped buying unnecessary things, cooked simple meals, and spent long hours thinking. The silence that used to scare him before had now become his teacher. He started noticing the small things that life offered, the sound of rain on his window, the smell of tea in the morning, the warmth of sunlight after days of clouds. These little things became his comfort. Then one afternoon, while walking through a local market, he met an old man who sold handmade items on a small wooden table. The man smiled and said, "Life is simple if you let it be simple." They spoke for a while. The old man said he had once worked in a big company too, but left it years ago because he couldn't bear the lies. Now he made small things with his hands and sold them. He wasn't rich, but he was at peace. That conversation touched him deeply. For the first time in months, he felt inspired again. He went home and thought about what he could do, something that would let him work honestly, without having to play office games. He remembered how he used to help people with writing reports and creating designs. Maybe he could start freelancing, work on his own terms, build something small but real. So he started. He borrowed an old laptop from a friend, created a simple online profile, and began offering his services. The first few weeks were tough. Hardly anyone noticed him, but slowly, small projects started coming in. A logo here, a report there. The payments were small, but the feeling was big. For the first time in a long time, he was working for himself, not for a boss or a system that demanded lies. He worked from his small room, often late into the night. But this time, the exhaustion didn't feel like pain. It felt like purpose. Every time a client thanked him or appreciated his work, he smiled quietly. He didn't need big awards or public recognition anymore. Honest work itself had become his reward. Months passed, and his small freelancing gigs grew into steady work. He met a few genuine clients, people who valued his integrity and professionalism. Slowly, the walls he had built around his heart started to come down. One day, a client asked him to help with a project and said, "I can trust you. You're different." Those simple words meant more than any promotion he had ever received. He realized that sometimes the world doesn't change around you. It changes because of you. Every time you choose honesty over comfort, you create a small space for truth to exist. Still, not everything was easy. There were times when payments were delayed, when clients disappeared without paying, or when loneliness crept in. But even on the hardest days, he told himself, "At least I'm not pretending anymore." He had built a life that was his own, fragile maybe, but real. As time went on, he met others like him, quiet souls who had once been broken by the system but were now building honest lives piece by piece. They shared stories, laughter, and lessons. He learned that everyone falls. The difference is what you do after the fall. Some stay down, some rise again pretending to be the same, and some rise changed, stronger, wiser, and more human. He had become the third kind. He often thought about his old job. Sometimes he missed the structure, the familiar faces, the sense of belonging. But then he remembered how that world had taken his peace away, and he smiled, knowing he had made the right choice. One evening, while working on a project, he received a message from one of his old colleagues. It said, "You were right. The company closed. Too many lies finally caught up." He stared at the message for a while, feeling both sad and peaceful. It was strange, and he didn't feel happy about it, but it gave him closure. Truth, after all, had its own timing. He looked out of his window at the city lights shining like stars. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of quiet victory. He hadn't destroyed anyone, hadn't taken revenge. He had simply chosen to walk his own path, and that path had led him to peace. He thought about how much he had changed. Once he had believed that goodness always wins quickly. Now he knew that goodness wins slowly, silently but surely. He realized that life isn't about avoiding battles. It's about learning which ones are worth fighting, and the fight to stay human in a world that pushes you to be fake is the hardest one of all. Sometimes he still met people who tried to take advantage of his kindness, but he wasn't the same person anymore. He had learned to draw lines, to say no when he needed to protect his peace without guilt. He wasn't bitter. He was balanced. One night, while closing his laptop after finishing a long project, he wrote one last line in his notebook, the same one that had been with him through everything. "Maybe I lost everything once, but I found something better. Myself. And now no one can take that away." He closed the notebook and smiled. He knew his journey wasn't over. There would be more struggles, more unfairness, more tests. But now he was ready for them, because he had learned that life isn't about being perfect or always winning. It's about standing up again each time you fall, and walking with your heart intact. He had fallen hard, yes, but he had also risen quietly, stronger than ever before. And as he looked at the night sky, he whispered, "If you battle with humans, you'll need luck. But if you battle with yourself and win, you'll need nothing else." For the first time in a long time, he felt proud, not for what he had achieved, but for what he had become. He wasn't the naive, hopeful worker anymore. He was someone who had seen the darkness of people and still chosen light, and that, he thought, was real strength. Time passed, and slowly the heaviness that once sat in his heart began to fade. Life didn't change suddenly, but day by day things started to feel lighter. He had learned to live with less, but he also realized that less didn't mean nothing. In fact, it gave him more space, more peace, more freedom, and more time to breathe. Every morning, he started his day early, sitting by the window with a cup of tea, The city was still half asleep, the streets quiet except for a few early workers. He liked that silence. It was honest, something he hadn't found in people for a long time. His freelance work had grown enough to cover his basic needs. He wasn't rich, but he was steady, and that steadiness gave him confidence. He had started helping a few young people online, guiding them on how to do their first freelance projects, how to deal with clients, and most importantly, how to stay honest in a world that often rewards shortcuts. He didn't call himself a teacher, but in some way he had become one. Whenever they asked him how he stayed strong after losing everything, he smiled softly and said, "You don't stay strong. You learn strength through pain. It's not a gift, it's something you grow." One day, while working on a project, he received an email from a new client. The message said, "We've heard about your work from others. We'd love to collaborate long-term." He read that line twice, almost in disbelief. People were now recommending him, not because of connections or power, but because of trust. That moment felt special. For years, he had been fighting just to survive. Now it felt like life was finally nodding back at him, saying, "You did well." He accepted the project, and the work turned out to be his best yet. The client was kind, understanding, and respectful. It reminded him that not everyone in the world was cruel. There were still good people out there, waiting to meet other good people. As his projects grew, he decided to take a small but brave step to build a small team. Not a company, not something big or showy, just a group of honest, hardworking people like him. He reached out to a few freelancers he had met online. Some of them were beginners. Others were struggling to find fair work. He told them, "Let's build something together. Not perfect, but honest." They agreed. In the beginning, it was difficult. Coordinating people, meeting deadlines, handling clients, and it was all new. But every time a problem came, they faced it calmly. There was no blame, no shouting, just effort and trust. He often told them, "We may not grow fast, but we'll grow clean." Slowly, word spread. More clients started noticing the honesty and consistency of their work. The small team became like a family, connected not by contracts but by shared values. Every evening after work, they would have small online meetings. They didn't just talk about projects. They talked about life, about what made them tired, what made them happy, and what they hoped for. Those moments were simple but real. For him, this was more than work. It was healing. After being betrayed and isolated, he'd finally found people who valued truth over tricks. One day, one of the younger team members said, "You know, I almost gave up before I met you. I thought being honest meant losing. But you proved that being honest just takes longer to win." He smiled quietly. That sentence stayed with him for days. It reminded him of how far he had come. He had gone from being broken and jobless to leading others, not with pride, but with compassion. His pain had turned into purpose. Sometimes he would still remember his old days, the office, the manager, the betrayal. But now those memories didn't hurt. They felt like old scars and reminders of battles survived. One evening, he was walking home after meeting a client. The streets were glowing under the streetlights. People passed by, some laughing, some tired, some lost in thought. He looked around and realized that everyone was fighting their own quiet battles. He whispered to himself, "Maybe that's what being human means, fighting, falling, and still choosing to try again." The next morning, he visited a nearby park. He had started going there more often lately. Watching people jog, children play, and elders sit on benches made him feel connected to the simple rhythm of life. He saw an old couple feeding birds and smiled. It reminded him that peace isn't something far away. It's in small things, small moments that often go unnoticed. Later that day, he sat at his desk and began writing again. Not for work this time, but for himself. He wrote about everything, the pain, the lessons, the growth. He titled the first page, "Battle with Humans." Good luck, you'll need it. That line summed up everything he had learned. Humans can hurt you, disappoint you, and test you, but they can also teach you, change you, and make you stronger than you ever thought you could be. He kept writing every night, pouring his heart out on paper. It wasn't just a story, it was his journey. The words felt alive, honest, and full of emotion. One day he shared a small part of his writing online. To his surprise, people started reacting. Hundreds of messages came in. Some said they related deeply. Others said it gave them hope. That's when he realized something powerful. His story wasn't just his. It was everyone's. Everyone had fought battles against people, against betrayal, against unfairness. His honesty had created a space where others felt seen. He decided to keep sharing more. Slowly, his simple post began to reach thousands. People started calling him the quiet fighter, someone who didn't shout his truth but lived it. It was never about fame or followers for him. It was about connection. He wanted people to know that losing to dishonest people didn't mean you were weak. It meant you were human. As months passed, his small team turned into a small company. Not a big one with shiny offices or big slogans, just a group of good-hearted people working from their own homes, creating honest work and supporting one another. He often reminded them, "We don't need to be perfect. We just need to stay real." And that became their motto. Years later, when he looked back, he couldn't help but smile. The same world that once broke him had unknowingly helped him build something stronger. He realized that battles with humans will never end. There will always be lies, greed, and unfairness, but that doesn't mean you stop being good. You just learn to protect your goodness without losing it. One evening, sitting on his balcony with his old notebook beside him, he wrote his final note. "The world may not reward honesty quickly, but it never forgets it. Time will prove who you are even when people don't." He closed the notebook and looked at the sunset. The sky was golden, soft, and peaceful, much like his heart now. He had walked through pain, loneliness, and fear, but he had come out with something unshakable, faith in himself, and that was enough. He smiled to himself and whispered, "I didn't win against humans. I just stopped fighting them. I started fighting for myself instead." The city lights began to glow one by one like stars being born. Somewhere inside him he knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of a calmer, truer life. Because in the end, the real victory wasn't about proving others wrong. It was about proving to yourself that no matter what happens, you can still stay kind, still stay true, and still keep walking with hope. And so, his story didn't end in pain or revenge. It ended in quiet strength. The kind that doesn't shout but shines. He had finally learned that the biggest success in life isn't about winning battles. It's about keeping your heart human, in a world that sometimes forgets what humanity means, and that's exactly what he did.